Welcome to Resilient. My name is Mike Kearney, the Risk and Financial Advisory CMO. We have been on an incredible journey since the first week of the COVID-19 shelter-in-place life that we have been living, at least in California, since March 16th. And over that time, we have covered a number of critical topics. Everything from the CARES Act ×2, we've done it twice, navigating a virtual workforce, scenario planning, a virtual close, cash flow, and so much more. And that's why this series is so important to me, to urgently bring what you need to know from the people in the know. And today is no different. We're going to deep dive on a very time-sensitive and important issue, reopening physical locations that have been shut down for over 2 months. Joined by 3 Deloitte leaders, Gopi Billa, a principal focused on risk sensing and scenario planning, Asif Dar, a principal and chief health informatics officer, and Jonathan Pierce, our national global mobility transformation leader. I'm looking forward to exploring the topic of reopening, or as they say, reboot. I'm going to talk about things like top concerns that leaders are sharing about their plans to reopen. What is a reboot and why is it so complex? Steps that leaders should consider in the planning to reopen, and tools to minimize the risk to workforce safety. So let's get to it. My conversation with Gopi, Jonathan, and Asif. I want to start off with a question, and this is to kind of get a little bit of background on yourself and the way you think. And that is obviously with COVID-19, and we see it daily, people are struggling. You know, there's another, I think, 2.5 million people applied for unemployment that I just saw today. There's still discussion about a second wave, and it's not really clear when we're going to get back to normal, whatever really normal is. And so with all that said, I want to ask each of you, and I'll start with Asif, and that is, what gives you hope about the future? So Asif, what gives you hope?
Yeah, well, let me talk about the word normal. What we're experiencing is anything but normal. What gives me a lot of hope is, whenever it storms, you look for rainbows. And when it's at night, you look for the stars. And what you try to find out is the light or the opportunities that are allowing us to find a North Star and a new direction. And what we're going to see for sure is the way business operates will change. And hopefully, we'll put the employee and their health in the center of the way we think about employment in general. We'll also think about the digital tools, the processes of engagement, and we'll start thinking about how health starts where we live, where we work, and in our communities, because for sure the contagion does as well. So as we rethink society in general and employment and employers and how they interact with their employees and create the confidence so that those employees come back to work, it gives me great hope that those will stick and become the wave of the future.
I love that, Asif. I tell you, every time I ask this question, I actually get more hope about the future. So thank you for that. Jonathan, let's go to you. What gives you hope?
So I think there's a couple of things that come to my mind. The first is the resiliency of people. And I know all kinds of people across the country, across the planet, dealing with this in very different ways. And certainly for myself, I feel blessed to be dealing it from the position that I'm dealing it with. I think at the same time, I've been inspired, and we've all been struggling with changes to our daily lives, changes to our outlook for our financial futures, our business futures, the organizations that we're a part of. But through that, I think I've taken a lot of inspiration from people's adaptability and the speed with which people are finding creative ways to find new ways of working, new ways of engaging, new ways of building relationships and communities. I think that's really encouraging. And secondly, and tied to it, I think one of the things that we've been talking about at Deloitte for a while as a point of view is the rise of organizations as a social enterprise, as not merely a money-making enterprise. And I think this crisis has really brought a focus to the importance of organizations that employ workers around the world and the role that they play as critical institutions in society in caring for people and their broad sense of well-being, as well as how the organization plays a role in the society at large. And so I think seeing that come to life, maybe faster than I would have expected because of the crisis, is another thing that makes me optimistic about the way we're renegotiating what is business, what is life, and how does it fit into the communities that we're trying to build.
Gopi, you've got a job ahead of you because those are two darn good answers. So what gives you hope?
Well, everything that Asif and Jonathan have said, definitely. In addition to that, I actually would, it's more personal. What really gives me hope is when I see my kids and their friends, how they adapted to the last couple of months. And if you believe that the organizations, businesses, and grown-ups have been affected by this crisis, the children have been affected significantly as well, without having the necessary coping mechanisms and not really knowing what's actually happening to them. So from going to schools and playing with their friends to not being able to see any of them, virtual learning, being at home, not being able to go out and run around and play. And despite that, the adaptability that they have shown, whether it's my children or the other children I look around and learn from friends, that actually gives me real hope that we'll be able to adapt to whatever comes out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. My wife, I love saying this because she's a technology teacher for elementary school. So she was thrust right in the middle, and hopefully all of the parents still love her, but she was thrust right in the middle of helping all of these teachers that really hadn't used technology much and helping them get online. So I couldn't agree with you more. I love watching the adaptability and the resilience of our kids, which that gives me a lot of hope too. Hey, Gopi, I'm going to stick with you because you guys have coined this term reboot about what companies potentially are going to be going through. So I'd love to just hear from you. What is a reboot in the context of reopening?
Well, that's a good question. And that's something that Asif, Jonathan, and I have spent a lot of hours on. Well, when we started looking at governments at all levels, started reopening in full or in part the economies, one of the things we also considered was on the businesses side, what was going on. And initially, when we thought about reopen, it reflected largely reopening a physical facility, whether it is a manufacturing plant, a retail store, an office, or a bank branch. And as we thought about it more, we realized that some of the things that we have seen over the last couple of months because of COVID are here for a long period of time, especially around virtual working. And then many employees are not going to go back to their workplaces post-COVID, as and when, even when offices open. But we will still continue to have operations. We'll still continue to have sales, marketing, back office, things happening virtually from wherever they are today. So we coined the term reboot to cover not just the physical workspaces, but also the virtual ways of working.
Hey, Gopi, it sounds like it's pretty complex. It's not for the faint of heart, but why is a reboot so complex? Like, meaning, like you just said, it's just not about reopening. There's so many different factors that come into it. What makes it so complex?
Well, Mike, there are, I mean, if you think about it, right, so most organizations are complex in nature. They are present in multiple jurisdictions. They have employees living in different states, possibly working in different states too. You have plants, facilities, the supply chains. They're all very complex. In addition to that, when we think about reboot, you also have multiple other stakeholders outside these organizations. You're talking about the governments at all levels, federal, state, municipal governments. You're talking about schools. You're talking about transportation. You're talking about financial institutions and so on and so forth, all of which are important. So the reason Reboot is so complex is every company's journey, we believe, is going to be unique. There are multiple stakeholders and jurisdictions. And within that, every employee, as we think about Reboot, the journey is going to be personalized. That's really the reason why it's complex.
It's ironic in that it may even be, and I'm not sure if this is true, but almost more complex going from a physical to a virtual environment than going back to work with this reboot process. Do you agree with that statement?
I do, because we don't really have a reference point to go back to. I mean, as we all quickly adapted to a new way of working because we were forced to a few months ago. But when we get back, we're not all going to go back at the same time, the same way. There's no real reference point for us to think about. And that's what makes it complex.
And I think it's important to say, Gopi, I know you would agree with this, that it's even not about going back, this sense that we're going to return to a way of working, operating our businesses that we had before. I think in some ways what we are learning is that the future of work we had been anticipating and sort of heading inexorably toward has been accelerated in some ways. We knew there was a shift in the way that workers were demanding virtual collaboration, and we're bringing together teams in virtual space to bring more diverse points of view to problems. And what I think one of the things that many organizations have learned through reacting to the crisis is that the speed with which we could affect the virtualization of work and increased and faster ways of collaborating with each other across teams and geographies, I think are benefits, silver linings, if you like, that we can lock in now. And as we think about reboot and coming back to something, I think we're actually not coming back as much as moving forward to a new way of thinking about how we operate.
And Jonathan, I think you framed that quite well, because as we think about the notion of reboot, some people might say, well, why can't we have our workers stay at home? Won't that be riskless? And now we're starting to see not exactly. There are inherent different workplace health-oriented issues at home. There's mental well-being. There is the individual that has 4 roommates and just can't find a good place to work. There are job functions that really aren't conducive in that environment. There's the individual who takes care of children that aren't able to go to school and has been working on video conference all day. There's being video conferenced out and the mental strains therein. All of these factors are creating a new series of conversations of what creates productivity, wellness, and health, irrespective of the environments people work in, and are uniquely configured for those actual work environments.
I love it, guys. I've got a question I want to pose to all of you. So I'm going to go around the horn kind of like we did with the first question. And I know that you all speak with a lot of leaders, executives, and I'd love to hear from each of you about what are their top concerns as they begin to think about reopening or rebooting, and what are some of their priorities. So why don't we start with Jonathan? I'm going to start, move it around, do it a little different this time. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things, back to sort of what gives me hope for the future, I think one of the things that's really clear is that amongst the business leaders that I've been talking to, and certainly the way this dialogue plays out within our own organization, is that what has come to the fore is the safety, health, and well-being of our workforce is the number one thing. And I think I'm impressed and inspired by the fact that across our clients, whether those are in the commercial sector or the public sector or in any industry, that theme of caring for the safety and well-being of our workers and customers and partners is the number one concern of business leaders. I think following on from those are a set of business priorities. In particular, I think there's a lot of dialogue around productivity, and I think being uncertain how to measure and manage productivity in a virtual world, and how do we enable workers to be productive either in a virtual space or in a very different physical space as we start bringing people back. And I think the sort of excellence of delivery and engaging with customers is or clients, depending on your industry, is another important focus. How do we create new relationships that lead to business in a way where there are barriers to interfacing with customers and partners and clients in a way that we might have. And so I think that's another really important concern in the businesses we're working with.
Asif, what are you hearing from folks that you speak with, both in terms of some of the challenges that they're facing and some of their priorities?
Well, I'm going to pick up the topic of health again. Health has become the resilience factor for business and business continuity. I mean, we've seen it all. With a contagion outbreak that can literally shut down plants, offices, the capacity to be in public as we used to. So health has become the primary concern of business continuity and is on the forefront mind of every executive we speak to. What's really interesting is as they think through that challenge of health, most of them have gotten to this idea to say, well, we were in a state of severe, what the public health professionals called mitigation. And it's not going to go from completely fully mitigated to all of a sudden everyone's running out in society and public like we used to. It will probably go in stages. Well, and it is also possible that there might be contagion that comes back in a community despite the best work that public health professionals, employers, employees, and the public do. And so this capacity to be resilient and have the tools to face whatever the challenges with COVID-19 and with the health challenges of the future is clearly on the top of every executive. Additionally, irrespective of the type of business that people are in, health has become a predominant feature. How do we create a retail space that feels or conveys the sense of both safety and wellness as a key principle of the experience that retailers might be considering? How can we make sure that we're starting to implement the best thinking in our factories and in our protein production facilities and in our manufacturing facilities? How can we make sure that we have hospitals that can deal with infection but don't become infected? Meaning, how can we create the environment for hospitals to have the right configuration and plan so that if contagion comes, it doesn't spread throughout the entire hospital and that all elective procedures become canceled once again? How do we reconfigure? How do we rethink through? And how do we make it centrally dynamic? Most importantly, how do we make sure that every different type of employee cohort has a unique experience? That we start to ask them the questions about what do you want? What would provide you the sense of support so that you are comfortable in whatever work situation you enter into? All of those are absolutely top of mind because they're not nice to haves anymore. They're literally the continuity of your business.
I love it. Gopi, what do you have to add? Folks that you've spoken to, concerns that they may have or priorities that they're thinking about as they consider their reboot?
I will expand on the point on the financial well-being, just building on the points on health well-being here. So a few things here, right? So one thing the executives I'm talking to, they talk about is they all understand the importance of keeping their employees safe. They all recognize both the costs and liabilities if they don't of keeping their employees safe. The thing which they are all grappling with, the tension, if you will, is how do you keep the business safe? And that's an important question. So depending on the sector that you're in, there are sectors, many sectors where the business is affected, and a few sectors positively, but many other sectors negatively. And in some sectors where you have retail, whether it is retail stores or restaurants or consumer banking branches and so on, and the sales have actually come down. So how do you manage financial well-being while you think about employee safety is a question I'm hearing a lot from the client's time talking to.
And it might be worth sharing just a little bit of data from, I guess, an online survey that we took just this week. And we were asking leaders what were the barriers to developing an effective reboot plan. And they could select more than one. But by far, sort of emphasizing, I think, some of the points that we've been making, by far the biggest barrier or the most commonly selected was the complexities around workforce. Whether that's, the financial well-being, the productivity, but all the things about managing a workforce in this environment. Second most, regulation and guideline compliance. And then a set of factors, all of which were importantly rated: organizational barriers, financial considerations, as Gopi was saying, and then shoring up their ability to map supply and demand in a very different and dynamic environment. All of those emerged as strong barriers for an effective and resilient reboot.
That's a great point, Jonathan. And one of the things, Mike, what it tells me is just the sheer uncertainty which all the executives are facing right now. There's no playbook. So everyone is trying to figure out how to get on the other side. That's what really is concerning everyone.
This is, I learned so much on every interview, and I'm like, my head is spinning right now. But I want to kind of drill down on the reboot a bit. And Jonathan, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the strategic questions, the very specific questions that leaders should be considering in their reboot as they're starting to give this some thought?
So I think the key things that we've been hearing from clients in terms of the questions that are on top of their mind are first, when will I be able to reboot? When can I reboot my organization? And it's very much to do with the macro conditions of what's happening in the surrounding, state or municipality, the mandates from a legal perspective, industry perspective, also understanding what's happening in the customer market and what are customers' sentiments, the sort of workforce risks from a safety perspective in terms of likelihood of infection rates, and the surrounding, enabling infrastructure for effective reboot. Those all feed into this question of when. And I think many of our clients are trying to map a sort of staging as they think through reboot that is in some ways happening against the backdrop of the broader reopening of societies that governments are leading us through. I think the second big question is, am I ready to reboot my organization? Is my organization ready? It gets a bit to some more micro conditions around the financial resiliency of the organization itself, the supplier risk and getting the supply chain right, understanding my workforce and what is my workforce's perspective on returning and what do they need to come back confidently. I think the third big question, how do I reboot? This is, how do I break down my workforce into phases and gates, into cohorts of workers, prioritizing certain locations over others, and what protocols do I put in place in terms of policies, but also testing and monitoring, or the way I manage my real estate in terms of, whether it's deep cleaning or space density or air exchange. All those considerations go into thinking about how I might reboot. And then, the last big question, how do we move from this space of reboot to support a long-term recovery? And that's about, how will I monitor success? How will I understand whether my workers are being productive and support them in increasing productivity? And how do I keep abreast of the fact that all these questions are impacted by a dynamic set of external factors, as we've been talking about? So we see those as the big four questions that clients are wrapping their heads around.
And Asif, what do you think some of the health-oriented questions or considerations that leaders should be thinking about, kind of building off on what Jonathan just said?
So most employers are thinking about the following. They're thinking about the work that their employees will do. They're thinking about the level of community transmission in the areas that they live, work, and commute through. They're thinking about the type of physical environments that they'll have to sit in to perform the work. And if you add all those three dimensions, you get a fairly heterogeneous series of needs, but needs that can be consolidated around what we would refer to as cohorts or personas. And each of them have different expectations and different journeys. They're also thinking about providing them with transparency in terms of what they'll do for them, clear options in terms of the tools and approaches, not only within the firm, but also public health resources, the resources that they have with their own healthcare providers, and pulling that all together in a journey that makes sense for that employee. So the employee isn't confused and scared about what they do next. I'll give you a couple of examples. If an individual wakes up in the morning and they have to go check the CDC guidelines and check their local health authority guidelines and go call a physician about their guidelines and wonder what they have vis-a-vis the symptoms that they present with on a day-to-day basis, boy, that's a lot of confusion and it's a lot of strain and stress. A lot of employers are starting to think, can I provide a conversational app to my employees or a website that they can go to ask those questions and get an immediate response? And if they have to ask more questions, a clear journey to go ahead and do that. A series of competencies that they can provide clear decision points that the employee can take in order for them to know what to do next. If an employee becomes unwell at work for a whole variety of reasons, what do they do next? Most employees want to know what the right thing is to do. They don't want to go and infect a bunch of people. But how do they go and do that in the way that makes the most amount of sense in that particular facility, in that particular situation? All of those journeys together, what we've been spending a ton of time thinking through, along with the both digital assets, the business process, the capabilities, and the policies and procedures that employers have to think through. So if you take all of the employee personas and cohorts that Jonathan started alluding to, and these digital tools and options, you actually have a pretty powerful toolkit if you weave them together appropriately. What you come up with is something that's not a one-stop shop, a simple, I've got a pill for that sort of model vis-a-vis technology. And I'm using a pill for that as an analogy to just a monolithic technology switch that you flip on and everything magically gets better. But you have the ability to have the conversation with employees, understand what their needs are, support them in their journey, create the right digital assets and the right experience of what they need when they need it. And all of a sudden, the hope is that as opposed to an employee that's scared, they'll feel empowered along the journey, knowing their employer is there for them the entire time.
I think you said that so well, Asif. And I guess I want to highlight a couple of points there that I think really resonate for me. One is that certainly there are workers who have been working through this whole crisis. Our clients are still designing better solutions for those workers, even though they've been sort of in the physical workplace through the crisis. Second is, I think there are workers who may not return at all, and we also need to design successful journeys for them in Reboot, that they'll stay virtual, stay productive virtual, and connected to the organization in the way that the organization needs them to grow them, develop them, and have them make really good impact. I think the other thing that you sort of hit home for me was this starting with the listening, because outside of essential workers, I think most of our clients are leading in with the idea that mandating a return can create risks, both real safety risks as well as liability risks. And if they can rather position employees to opt in to returning to the workplace, being confident that the services, that the protocols, that the support they're being provided will keep them as safe as possible, that's by far a preferable model.
You know, I'd like to pick up another point as well, which is the capacity to learn from industry to industry is very unique right now. I'll give you an example. Is it possible for us to deploy mobile symptom conversational apps? Is it possible to connect that to badging and security systems so you have a very effortless process? Sure. all of that is within the context of solutions that we think about and frankly help build every day. Is it possible for people to have a physically distanced, what people call socially distanced, I refer to as physically distanced elevator rides? Absolutely. But as elevators go from 20 to 4 a ride, capacity drops. So are we willing to let people sit in 2-hour, 3-hour lines, maybe infecting each other? Pretty bad idea, right? Wouldn't it be smart to take a cue from the airline industry, where they went through their entire transformation and created reservation-based, almost like appointment-based experiences? So you do as much as you can from the home, and then you know what your time is to get to that elevator, and you're not waiting in huge long lines. It's the opportunity of thinking of learning from different industries to make the experience meaningful and to customize it around the actual human experience people want and need, despite the challenges, is what we are referring to as resilient recovery.
Love all this. Asif, I want to stay with you and talk about the importance of stakeholders in the entire reboot process. Can you talk about the importance of stakeholders and maybe talk also about some of the key stakeholders that leaders really should consider? And I think you've already alluded to a lot of it, but I don't want to forget the importance of stakeholders.
Well, let's talk about 3 very important ones to start off with: the employer, the customer or public, the employee, and public health agencies and government. Each of those have to be able to be in sync with one another in order for this reboot to go into a period of resilient recovery. They have to know how to work effectively with healthcare and life sciences. And you say, well, why life sciences? And are they working with life sciences, or are they informed by it? It's pretty much the latter. But let me explain what I mean. Well, in the beginning of this crisis, there were no known effective pharmacological responses. So what did we do? We did what we refer to as non-pharmacological interventions. In fact, some of the best papers on non-pharmacological interventions happened in the influenza pandemic of 1918. There are tons of analysis, and that's where we get this physical distancing. A lot of that comes from the work that was done in 1918. But as pharmacological interventions occur, the nature of the contagion may change. And we saw that with HIV/AIDS. Now, we might get a vaccine one day, and obviously things change as well. Being able to work between each of the stakeholder groups, as healthcare facilities learn to be more dynamic based on the nature of contagion, as life science companies figure out how to bring cure and treatment and vaccines and testing and PPE all to market, with new medical devices that help the sickest amongst us. As schools figure out how to manage the very complex task of getting school-age people back to work and those in higher learning. As transportation is configured to make sure that we're not in close contact with each other, but appropriately physically distanced. All of these things work like a dance together. And as a society, we will too. Each of these pieces working together to create, I wouldn't call it a new normal, but I would call it a resilient recovery, so that we can, as a society, come to something that is reinvented, that is something that we can leverage in not only this pandemic, but in others in the future. About 3 years ago, Deloitte embarked upon this really interesting exercise of defining the future of health. And we looked at all these variables, and we said, by 2040, the future will look very, very different when it comes to health. Well, guess what? A lot of that future has already started. Virtual visits have become things that people are experiencing. People are working at home, and the future of work is something that they're experiencing through video conferencing and a whole host of other tools. So it's amazing to see the future come so far fast in front of us. And I think each of these sectors and each of these stakeholder groups that need to work efficiently together to come to that future as efficiently as possible.
Hey, Jonathan, I want you to maybe share your perspectives on how organizations should govern the reboot process.
Yeah, really good question. And I think not a simple one, because there's no sort of reboot function in an organization. I think many of our clients have stood up task forces and steering committees. I think as we work with organizations, one of the things that becomes really, really clear is that the development of an overall approach and strategic plan for reboot, including a set of priorities, a way of segmenting a workforce, of thinking about the stages of reboot into recovery, is very much a C-suite issue. And it's a C-suite issue because clearly there is workforce dimensions, there are IT dimensions, there are cyber risk dimensions around what do we do with the kinds of data we might collect through the kinds of processes and protocols we might implement. There are risk issues and regulatory issues. There's clearly investments that we'll need to make. There's what do our customers expect and what is our market sensing. All of those factors, as we've talked about, are highly relevant here. And so what we find is that this response, this reboot, is the archetypal version of something that we've been talking about as a symphonic C-suite issue. And symphonic C-suite was a concept we started talking about a couple of years ago, with the observation that even just in the sort of dynamic, modern, contemporary economy, that the kinds of issues that our clients were facing really put pressure on the old divide and conquer C-suite model, that, we have a CHRO who looks after workforce issues and a CIO who looks after technology issues, when every sort of workforce strategy is also a brand strategy, when every risk strategy is also an IT strategy. The old model of divide and conquer in the C-suite just doesn't work. And COVID response is sort of the archetypal issue to sort of bring that to life. And what we recommend is a symphonic approach that brings together the capabilities of the organization's functions and its businesses to make these strategic decisions. But having done that, I think one of the things that's very clear is that the reboot will play out very differently in very different geographies and locations because of the different pace at which COVID has impacted, the different places that different geographies are in terms of the curve, the rate or speed with which surrounding infrastructure will open up and the surrounding economy, even different attitudes within the community to distancing, to lockdown, to personal protection. All of those things have a really important part to play in navigating successfully, and they're dynamic. And so having established at the C-suite level a strategic plan, we think it's really important for our clients, and certainly this is an approach we're taking at Deloitte, to drive really clear governance in the execution of that plan at a local level, because decisions will have to be made quickly. There'll have to be clear lines of responsibility and rapid decisions made, and that's going to be best served in a sort of local execution model of a sort of global strategic plan.
Just one other thing I would add, which is actually for many of our clients, they also have significant customer and supply relationships. And when you think about Reboot, you also think about how you link up to your supply chains and how you link up to your distributions on the other side. And whenever they think about governance, and especially given some of these supply chains are integrated across multiple clients in a particular sector, they also have to start thinking about how what they do has an impact either upstream or downstream on the supply chain. And that's where the governance becomes both important but also challenging because it's not a single organization effect, this will affect multiple organizations at the same time.
I love the concept that you brought up around symphonic execution because that's actually one of the issues that I see with my clients, beyond obviously COVID-19, but many other things where, like you said, there's this divide and conquer approach, and the idea of everybody coming together to manage this, to drive it, to lead it, I think is fantastic. Gopi, I want to go back to you, and I want to ask you about, and I want to get a bit of tactical here, but what are the specific steps that leaders really should consider in planning to reopen their workplace? And I know that we're talking about Reboot, so we could put it in that context, but if you could give a sense for some of the specific steps that folks that are listening can really grab onto.
Sure, Mike. I think there are a few. I think the first one, we talked about that on this podcast multiple times. This is really understanding who are the employees, what are the archetypes by jurisdiction, by work type, by function, by whatever else. So who are these people? And more importantly, the employee sentiment, if you will. So one of the things our surveys so far and what we're hearing from our clients is showing that for the same similar employee, by function, by jurisdiction, by type of work, if you will, the risk appetite or how they see the risk in going back to a physical workplace is actually quite different. So one of the things we need to think about is who are these people and how do we think about their journeys? That's the first step. The second one, very tactically, is depending on how many jurisdictions you, as a company, are present in, every jurisdiction has a different mandate, different guidelines right now, and different stages in terms of reopening. Every state is going through a different process right now. Understanding that and understanding what it means for you as a business and for your employees is actually going to be very important. The third piece is around facilities and infrastructure. And Asif talked about earlier, giving an example about elevators. So whether it's elevators, whether it's other common areas, even within an office, how do you think about things like common facilities like cafes, restrooms, and so on and so forth? What design changes if are needed to make this workable for employees when they were to come back to the physical workplace? That's the number one. That's three. Then there are a few others. We talk about tools and solutions. And the important concept here, which I would like us to think about, is transparency. A big part of doing this successfully is going to be around trust, which the employees will have in their employer. And part of the trust is going to be really built on transparency in terms of what sort of information that they share about their health, who have been in contact with, and so on and so forth, and how that is used for their own benefit, the employees' benefit, as well as the organization's overall. I think that's going to be very important. And for that, you need to have the right tools and solutions to make that work. So those would be some of the immediate tactical next steps, which I would think about for organizations. Of course, they all need a plan. This is not going to be a one-way street in terms of while you'll have a plan, the health situation is likely to evolve. The government mandates are likely to evolve, which means you'll have to go back multiple times to reevaluate the plan and have additional safeguards as we think about executing on it.
Awesome. I love it. Now we get to drill down a bit more on tools. So Jonathan and Asif, can you talk about some of the tools that executives, business leaders could potentially use to minimize the risk to workforce safety? Jonathan, I'll start with you.
I think one of the first things I'd say, just picking up what Gopi was talking about earlier, I think this idea of developing a plan based on segments of the workers, of the workforce is really important. The needs of different kinds of workers are very different, I think, as we've been hitting on. The needs of a frontline customer worker are very different from a supply chain or manufacturing worker, are very different from an office worker or call center worker. And we need to be sensitive to that the needs that they have are different and their perspectives on coming back will be different. I think also what's important is prioritizing what work is most disrupted at the moment, and that needs a different approach, whether that's return or a different approach to virtual. And then understanding some of the other factors we've mentioned, like safety factors, and how do you bring all that together to develop cohorts that make sense, that you can start planning waves of return for, and to a point that Ars had made earlier, start really crafting the right support and the right journeys for. And so we have a set of tools we call Workforce Reboot Analytics, which sort of accelerates the decision-making process in the development of a strategic plan by giving really rapid insights into those kinds of questions. What do our workers want? And what are their perspectives? What work has been the most disrupted? What are the safety risk factors or health factors in different locations that we need to determine, even what are our customer sensing factors that we want to take into account. And so we can bring those dynamics rapidly using some algorithmic analysis and a workforce survey, and bring them together in a matrix that helps identify those cohorts. And around those cohorts, we can then plan for or analyze cohorts against physical space, because the capacity of our physical space is going to be different in the context of different sort of load leveling across that space, and capacity for getting people in and out of the space, the real estate management protocols around deep cleaning, and the other sort of protocols we might implement around space will mean that the capacity of space is different. We have to map our cohorts against physical space capacity to start thinking about how quickly we might be able to bring different cohorts into a physical workplace. And so our Workforce Reboot Analytics is designed to give organizations a sort of rapid but thorough way of breaking down the considerations for developing those cohorts and mapping them against space. And that becomes the heart of the strategic reboot plan. But beyond that, I think there's a whole set of tools that are also important in thinking about the design and implementation of the experiences for those cohorts. And Asif, why don't you pick up that?
Yeah, when we start thinking about the health journey, there are a number of new tools and some old tools that employers are thinking through. Well, let me start with the first major area. Often employers have ERP solutions, they have CRM solutions, they have human capital ones, they've got badging and security, and they've got space allocation or scheduling. The problem is none of those really connect vis-a-vis the journey we're talking about. So at Deloitte, we've been exploring the series of tools that might help create a consistent journey and connect an employee throughout that entire process, instantiating the unique requirements of the cohorts that you were referring to, Jonathan. We recommend, generally speaking, an employer think about, where's all this data going to sit in? PII, personally identifiable information, all of a sudden becomes PHI. And having the place to have that data sit, or in certain cases for you to utilize and expunge of, is really important. And thinking of the data rules therein are critical. Let me give you some examples. Many employers are starting to consider how to do mobile or at-home based enhanced screening support. How do you digitize the CDC or employee screening procedures into a seamless user experience that enables non-contact temperature or other sort of data to be pulled into an analysis for an employee to understand if their symptoms together are consistent or inconsistent with COVID-19. If inconsistent, maybe that employee then feels secure and the employer feels secure for them to appear at work. If an individual has symptoms which are consistent, they may become apprehensive, they may become concerned. They need to have their case managed and they need to be engaged appropriately. So the leverage and use of employee engagement and case management and tools to provide safety and health education. And this is really important, the word education. Employees need to know in advance what are the requirements, what are the best practices, what are the guidelines that employers would like them to follow in their unique work environments, and if they, for instance, might feel unwell. Providing that education up front is a clear opportunity to help them know in advance what to do in their journey. And case management, if certain things happen to them, especially digital case management, a powerful tool therein to help them with their journey if indeed they do fall ill at work or even at home. Analytics and management or reporting are very useful. It's important that only the appropriate data that employees have consented to be used for analytics are used in that setting. We have a series of tools that we've built. We refer to them as My Path to Work, which is based upon our award-winning patient engagement and analytics solution that is already live in 22 countries supporting millions of patients. It was initially developed and designed in the setting of virtual health and digital clinical trials, and has a robust consenting framework so that employees can choose what data that they want to provide and how and in what setting it's used. This then allows the employer to know what analytics that they can perform on what data sets. And we also provide very robust analytics for employers to conduct. For instance, if somebody gets sick or if there's a hotspot, it would be wonderful to be able to use analytic tools to be able to determine where it is in a timely behavior, because time makes a difference. But it's not worth risking the trust of your employees by misusing sensitive data to get there. Finally, digital contact awareness is something everybody's been hearing about. We've been hearing about it all over the globe, and technology companies in the US have been providing options as well. What we think is that employees should have the option to opt into these approaches. And so for those employees that wish to, let's say, use Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or whatever to help provide a digital tool to support their memory in terms of what context they've been in touch with, and to potentially nudge them when they're in the workforce themselves if they're getting too close or if they need to be nudged in terms of healthy behaviors. It's an interesting toolkit. But I have to say that still today, memory is the technology that is most deployed, meaning our own minds and our own memory. Until these tools are piloted and are used carefully with consent and opt-in approaches and perfected, we need to still utilize and empower employees to use their minds, to be encouraged and supported with digital technologies, and employ health resources to have the automation tools to engage them in as functional way as possible. The collection of all of these tools and many more is a solution set we refer to in our commercial employer practice as My Path to Work.
This has been fascinating, guys. We are like, I miss baseball, so I'll use a bottom of the ninth metaphor or analogy. So we're in the bottom of the ninth, and I call this lightning round. I'm going to ask each of you a question. There's 3 questions. I'm going to give each of you the opportunity to answer them. I'm going to say 10 to 15 seconds each, and then we'll close it out. And I'm going to go as follows. I'm going to start with Gopi, then Jonathan, and then Asif. So the first question is, our point of view talks about resilience as not being a destination, but rather a state of mind. And the question I love asking my guests are, what are the attributes of a leader that embodies resilience? Gopi, I'll start with you.
Sure, Mike. I would say ability to handle uncertainty, especially now. Adaptability, a positive attitude, very important, and the stamina that's required to see the organization through the crisis.
A positive attitude is one of my favorite responses. Jonathan, what's your thoughts?
I think all those things, of course. To me, it's about bouncing back. And when difficulties happen, having the mindset that's about finding either a way back or, in this case, a new way.
And Asif?
Preparedness, planning, adaptability, and hope.
Love it. Okay, the next question. And we've talked a bit about trust. So the question is, what's one thing that leaders can do to build trust with customers, employees, or other stakeholders? Gopi, I'll start with you again.
I would go with honesty. And more than any other time, honesty And within that transparency, what you do, how you handle yourself, how you communicate, and keeping the truth, not just to yourself, but sharing it with your employees and customers, is going to be extremely important.
Yeah, Gopi, that's one of the things that I've heard more times than not, especially in a time of crisis, that executives have shared that transparency and authenticity are critical. So thank you for that. Jonathan, what's one thing that leaders could do to build trust?
To me, it's about starting with listening, whether that's listening to customers, listening certainly to employees and workers and partners. And I think one of the great things is we're finding that we have at our disposal so many tools to enrich the two-way conversation we have with our stakeholders. And I think really starting there and getting creative about how to get those inputs so we can design for, as Asif says, a resilient recovery.
Isn't it amazing what can happen when you actually listen? I'm being a little facetious, but I totally agree with you. Asif, what are your thoughts?
Work together. It's amazing what can happen when you listen, just like Jonathan says, when you listen and you consider the trade-offs together and the powerful ability for transparency to emerge and for people to really know that there are trade-offs, and collectively when employers and employees come together, have those conversations, great things can happen.
Love it. Final question, and I don't think you guys are going to have a hard time answering this one. What's one reboot innovation that you're most excited about? Gopi, once again, I'll start with you.
I would say, I think one of the things I've seen is I've seen more children and pets. I think that's cool. There are virtual parties, there are multiple things. As much as I would crave to go back and see people in person, one thing I would like to continue to see is this has made business a lot more personal. I would like to continue to see that as we move to reboot into recovery after that.
It's so funny. It's like, in a weird way, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I feel like I know the people I work with better, even when I would engage with them, in a physical environment. It's bizarre. It's not what I would have thought. Jonathan, how about you?
It's funny. We were talking the other day. My 6-year-old the other day, he brought up at the dinner table. He said, I miss phone calls. Can we have phone calls without video? I did start to think there is a little bit of maybe we're overindulging in some ways. But I guess what my real answer to this question about innovation is, I think it's what's exciting me is we're finding lots of ways to adapt things that we've built and things that have existed for a long time into new contexts. And whether that's something like video conferencing that we always thought was, a sort of work thing, and now it's very much a part of our personal lives, or whether it's sensing capability, and we used to think of that as a customer thing, but now we're finding really good ways to apply it to our workforce and really understand their priorities and preferences. I think it's those new applications of the things that we've invested in over time that are really exciting, because we can do that really quickly.
It's such a great point, Jonathan, in that, companies or, our firm or others have, created these innovations for one purpose. And I've seen that over and over and over again recently, where it was created for one purpose and now applied for another purpose, which is where I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation. And I think that's a great message to everybody that's listening. Think about what you have at your disposal to solve some of these problems that are in front of you. Asif, I'm going to let you take it home. What's one innovation you're excited about?
I think one of the greatest innovations that we've ever experienced is life. And I will tell you that I've heard more often than not, hey, Asif, when are we going to get back to living? And the right answer is now. Every equation has fixed and variable constraints. And part of the world of innovation is figuring out what's fixed and what's variable, and working within the variability to figure out, in this case, how to live and live well. We'll figure out as a society how to get through this. We'll figure out as a society, how to get the right countermeasures in place so that eventually this contagion will be a thing of the past. What we need to do now is to pull together our best innovative thinking in the areas of life sciences and healthcare, true, but of how to live. We can't wait to live. That's for sure the mistake that we've all been hearing. When are we going to get back to life? What we need to do is to innovate life now.
Gosh, there couldn't be a better way to end it. No, please go. I don't want to end it. That was such an awesome answer. So jump on board.
I was just going to say that Asif always takes things to another level. It's so fantastic. It makes me think, Mike. I want to re-answer your first question about what makes us optimistic. To me, the fact that Asif is helping Gopi and I and a whole team of others navigate Deloitte and our clients through this certainly makes me optimistic.
Well, I'd say what makes me optimistic is that you guys were so welcoming to a healthcare wonk and a policy expert who spent most of his life trying to figure out how to get cures to market. But you're helping me figure out a way to get cures to employers. In terms of how they operate.
I am honestly inspired by listening to all of you talk, that this was not just about Reboot from a business perspective. This is about making people's lives better. And I think, Asif, for you to answer and finalize this entire conversation with what are you most excited about, and it's about life and living, it's an incredible way to end it. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Gopi. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Asif. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you, Gopi, Jonathan, and Asif. There are so many things that I learned, so many key takeaways, but a few that really jumped to the top of my mind, things that I wrote down. First of all, this is not a return to what it was like prior to COVID-19. It truly is about a reboot. And core to that reboot is tailoring to the needs of employees. And then the other thing that I heard, this has to be led across the C-suite and coordinated with key stakeholders. We have covered a lot of topics over the last few months, and we have an incredible backlog of guests that we're going to continue to bring to you. But if you have any challenges that you think we should be talking about, or anybody that you think we should be speaking with, hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. And then for those who have, thank you. It's awesome to hear from you as we prioritize which topics to bring to you next. And looking at my calendar, we got a lot. For more insights across all aspects of COVID-19, just go to Deloitte.com on our COVID page. You can also listen to the Resilient podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and even Spotify. And there's so many more. So until next time, stay safe and remain resilient.